Welcome back to the Forge. Have you ever been in a moment where you knew you needed to say something, but you didn't? Think about this time when you may have been at a family gathering and your child may have began acting out. But before you could respond, a family member stepped in and criticized your child harshly and challenged you and your parenting in front of everyone. You probably felt immediately that your face was getting warmer, your heart rate changed. You started thinking about everyone else in the room. You may well have wanted to say, I will handle this, and speak to me privately if you disagree. But instead, you stayed quiet. And you told yourself, I don't want to cause a scene. I can address this later. Everyone will think I'm being defensive. The moment passes, and your child sees that another adult can override you. Your wife sees you withdraw. The family member learns that public interference carries little consequence. You may have avoided the embarrassment, but you lost ground in your own family. Or maybe you've been out and about with your wife and some friends, and your wife starts poking fun at you, making fun of you. And you laugh because everybody else is laughing. And you think that objecting would make the room uncomfortable. But in that process, you've become distant and possibly resentful. Your wife may think of it as it was a joke and you appear to accept it. But you remember the moment where you abandoned yourself. So today, Jason and I want to talk about embarrassment and how it's often the entry fee for acting before the room gives you permission. Now, Jason, welcome to the show as always. It's great to have you here. But I got a question for you. Why does speaking up feel more embarrassing than staying silent?
Well, I don't think it's the idea of speaking up is more embarrassing than speaking out, or is speaking out is more embarrassing than staying silent. I think it's the idea of a fear of being judged and what comes with that. Men have a tendency of thinking many steps ahead, and oftentimes when we're thinking about an interaction, when we're not emotionally triggered and we're just letting the interaction play out in our minds, we have this idea of what's going to happen. Whether that's right or wrong is relevant. All that matters is that we have this idea of how the interaction is going to play out, and then we have to ask ourselves, is it worth it? And oftentimes we have the sense of no, it's not worth it. And that usually comes from our past upbringing, our conditioning, and how we've dealt with situations as adults and the feedback that we've gotten. And yeah, we might say to ourselves, well, that was a missed opportunity. But we don't actually see those opportunities as something that we can understand better. So we just leave them as missed opportunities. And we allow our our programming to kick in and to take over, to ride the show. So when we have this opportunity of speaking up, there's this fear that says, well, I haven't spoken up before. Why would I do so now? Or is it worth it to speak up? And oftentimes we don't have the language, or we don't have the the preparation that's needed many times to say what needs to be said. I know that that's been true for me a lot of times, is I've been caught in a certain mental pattern. And then something happens where I know that I could speak up, but the pattern is there and it's hard for me to break out of it in that moment. I haven't prepared to deal with something like that. And so the pattern the opportunity gets missed. And I end up regretting not doing more. So I think the embarrassment really comes from the what if. or from the idea that we've spoken up in the past and our ideas have been so rejected that we felt like we ourselves were being rejected.
Yeah, you bring up a great point there. I know in my own personal experience, it's happened to me several times where things are going on in public, and there is that embarrassment factor because you feel everybody looking at you and judging you, as you said. There's that fear aspect of it, and you just, in my experience, I just wanted to kind of like crawl away and hide in a hole, and like how can I usher the family out of this situation, or how can I, you know, move away so that people aren't going to see all this stuff going on and everything, and there's also a sense of victimhood in that too. When I really think about that, because then I kind of play on that. Well, look at me and what she has done to me, or what they have done to me, and stuff like that, and it really plays into a sense of weakness. But that weakness comes from a place of not understanding my value fully as well, and so it so when from my experience, when I fell into that trap, there is that. It's like I don't have a space to speak here. I don't have the right to stand up for myself in this moment. And there is also the fear of, well, if I do speak up, I might come across too harsh, and I might say something that could be in an extreme the other way. And so then you get into that sense of flight or freeze, so to speak, is what I've experienced in my own life, and sometimes I did, like play along too, right? Like, I didn't really like the fact that I was being embarrassed, or I didn't like the fact that I'm being criticized or compared. That I mean, I think that was often a lot of times one of the more challenging things that I struggled with, was being compared to another person. Like, well, why can't you be more like that person, kind of thing, right? Like, and especially when it's in front of other people, right? Like it's hard enough when you're in private and you're having those conversations, but when you're out in front of people, it's like, how do you respond to that, right? Like that was kind of my experience.
Yeah, and that's a very valid experience because we have this condition where our we all go off of behavioral patterns. So what has worked before, what hasn't worked before. Things that haven't worked before, we create solutions for that. We're going to do something different. Sometimes we overcorrect because the evidence that we experience as what hasn't worked before has been so severe that we're like, well, I never want to experience that again. And so we create these um, rules for ourselves that keep us from acting a certain way. And then we utilize those rules so fiercely because they seem to work for the most part, that when there is an opportunity for us to show our worth, we have we're now in this fight between, do I keep on following the rule, or do I address this as an exception, as an opportunity? And it tells me that people are following the wrong rules. People are following rules based on reactive experiences rather than who they want to become. They're focusing on what they don't want, really. And men and women do this equally. The thing is, the idea of what we don't want becomes so powerful that we utilize that more and we hold that with higher value than what we want to experience, what we do want out of life. And so we tend to mitigate risk than we do, or we tend to mitigate tragedy than we're willing to explore risk.
Yeah, that risk. is the uncomfortable part, and that's the part where growth happens, as we've been talking about a lot of things. And I really I really appreciate this idea of you know bringing this awareness to ourselves, right? Because I know for myself, like over the years, learning to be in that uncomfortable space, as challenging as it is, it's actually the probably sometimes and oftentimes the best place to be in. You know, especially when you're learning to not fear that uncomfortability, and start putting things forward. And it's not a, you know, and we're talking about these scenarios that I brought up to begin with. There's a million different types of scenarios where something like this may have happened, and and you can pick and choose whichever one you want to bring forward, and then you look back at it, and I know I've often done this myself too. Is like, well, how could I have responded differently to that? How could I have handled this differently? And and there is that moment where you think about that, but oftentimes, like you shared, the programming is so deep that when the next scenario happens, you don't remember the conversation you had afterwards about how you're going to change for the next time, right? And so it is it's not an easy journey to navigate through this, but the more we become aware of what's going on within ourselves in these moments, and the more we begin to rehearse these scenarios in healthy ways or whatever, you will eventually find ways to be able to, when the next time these opportunities or these things happen, you will work out ways of how to confront them in a healthy way, in a safe way that creates boundaries that we talked about earlier, or and it may not come out clean. It may not come out clean at first because you're you're fumbling. You're taking these steps. You're stepping out into this area of discomfort of actually, maybe standing up for your child, or standing up for the way that you parent, or standing up to your wife even about the way she treats you in public and stuff like that, right? Like those are not necessarily easy things to confront, and oftentimes it's a lot easier once you get into the practice of it to confront it in the moment than it is to confront it later.
And this is the whole idea of the threat of social exposure, because everything that we're talking about is a social interaction. And the social exposure is the most scary thing that we can experience. And it's because of the fact that when we are engaging socially, we are seen for who we are based on how we act and react, and the ways in which other people perceive us. They're going to act, react, and respond to us in ways that may feel like we are being rejected. And rejection is the number one fear that all humans have. People would argue that it's falling or loud noises. Those are learned fears. Those are learned fears based on what we've experienced as children. The one fear, the one thing that every single person has from the get-go, the one fear everyone has is the fear of rejection, because rejection equals death. And that's why it's so powerful, because a loud noise might mean a predator, or falling might mean that you hurt yourself, but rejection means that you are alone. If you are alone, you are vulnerable. If you are vulnerable, you could get eaten, or something else. So it becomes a really an ancient programming thing that we deal with. And so when we are looking at this from a social exposure sort of way, what we have to look at is what are we registering from this interaction? What is it that we are capturing from others? What are we trying to monitor in ourselves? And also, what are we trying to anticipate? Because no one wants to be criticized. They don't want to be rejected. They don't want to create conflict, and definitely don't want humiliation. because all four of those equal you are no longer part of the group. You are out. And if you are out, then that doesn't feel good. You feel alone. You feel like you are exposed. You feel vulnerable. And whether it's someone who is refusing to say something that's controversial, refusing to stand up for their position as a parent, refusing to um, reinforce boundaries with a spouse, or even someone who is unwilling to take the moral high ground when there is something not right happening within a group. All of these occur because we are afraid of being exposed and rejected. We don't want to be the biggest nail in the wood, because the biggest nail is the one that gets hammered first. And so we tend to want to just go along to get along. So that time when someone says something and everyone chimes in and laughs, it's because they all want to fit in, regardless of whether they agree with it or not. The time when a child acts out and the parent just, oh, just let the child express themselves. For whatever reason, they're afraid of being rejected by their child, which is, it blows my mind that would ever be the case. Because really, the children are supposed to learn from you, not the other way around. And if you hear someone have a nervous laughter, or if you see someone who's acting a bit awkward, these are signs that a person feels like they're uncertain in their social interaction. That uncertainty is because they don't know how secure they are with the people that they are interacting with. And so these are really good ways of identifying people who are just afraid of being outcasts. They're afraid of being told you are not right for this group, or you are not supported. You are not seen as someone who deserves to be part of this group. No one wants to feel that, especially from our own family, from our spouse, from our children, from our parents. Though I know that these things happen all through those levels from time to time. If it's your kids, all that I can say is be a better parent. Learn some boundaries and be a better parent, because you're supposed to be teaching your children and modeling what is right or wrong, what is seemly, and what needs to be monitored and controlled from your parents. As children, you don't know any better. And so as parents, it's our job to really make sure that our children are set up for this world, to be able to go through it, to learn, grow, and evolve, and to then become better than us eventually, we hope. If it's from your spouse, this is more of a situation where you have to figure out what did you go into this marriage with? Not monetarily, not physically, nothing like that, but your values. What values did you go into this marriage with? What agreements did you go into this marriage with? What was understood before you became contractually obligated to each other? These are really important questions to ask, because these are going to help understand where you're supposed to be showing up. And oftentimes, I don't think a lot of people really have those conversations. So a lot is left in limbo. People are left to really discover this on the fly. And by then, each person has a preconceived notion of who the other person is, what their role is, and how they, as an individual in the relationship, is supposed to act and react. And so then this creates more of that sense of social exposure. If I do something wrong, or if I do something that my partner doesn't agree with, I'm going to hear about it, or I'm going to experience that in some way. And I don't like that. So I don't want to do that. And I don't know where those limits are. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm not going to say much. I'm going to keep to myself, and I'm only going to do the bare minimum.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of great points there as listening to what you were sharing. And when I think about, yeah, like these different scenarios about, fear of losing respect or whatever from your child by correcting them in the moment with their behavior and stuff like that. I totally am on board with the idea that we as parents are to teach our children, how to behave and stuff like that. Especially when it, I mean, there are some things that are, there are definitely some things that are not great behaviors that children can have, right? And they have their breakdowns and stuff like that. And there's healthy ways to help a child work through that, but not by ignoring it, not by allowing the child to, when you allow the child to continue to do their, act out in their behavior, um, it implants unhealthy behaviors in them as they get older, in the sense of entitlement and other things, and things, and there could be a whole list of other things that could be repeated in that, and I liked also the idea of what you're talking about near the end there, with the conversations that people oftentimes don't have with their spouses or their potential partner before the marriage commitment and stuff like that. And that's something that's really come to mind for me, as I'm in this world of being single, and at the point of dating. Like, once I get beyond like the first couple of dates, in my mind, it's time to start talking about some of these real things in life, about how are, if we're going to move towards a marriage relationship in the future, what is that going to look like? What kind of ways are we going to be looking at interacting with each other? Like, really dig deep into the heart of what each person is, and what they're beyond the surface level stuff, because those conversations had early gives both people the opportunity to not only change how they learn to interact with that person, but grow in the sense of how they need to adjust themselves as well, right? Because let's face it, none of us are perfect human beings, right? We as you've shared, and as I've, we come into relationships with things that we've experienced in the past, our own ideas, our own whatevers, and it doesn't make anything necessarily right or wrong. It's just those are the experiences that we've had. These are the beliefs that have been developed as a result of that. These are the ways that we tend to react or respond as a result of all these things. And it and by having these deeper conversations, it allows us the opportunity to not only learn from each other, but to grow in the sense of areas where we can actually develop more healthy ways of these interact when these interactions come up, right? Like, and stuff like that, right? It could lead to like a simple little, we're going out tonight, and if this comes up, you have a little hand gesture, or something that you do to say, hey, this hit me in some way, right? Like, it doesn't mean that you're controlling. It's just the way that gives the person a signal that, okay, that wasn't good, right? And then it doesn't necessarily have to be addressed right then and there, but because you've already now addressed it in that way through whatever way you communicate how you're going to address those kinds of scenarios up front, it then allows for the door to have a more deeper conversation later as well, I believe, right? Because you already had a communication in the front end. It bridges the gap to allow for that conversation to happen in the back end. And it will reduce the amount of times, especially when it's between spouses, it will reduce the amount of times where these embarrassing moments will happen. When it comes to other family members, or other people or friends and stuff like that, that's a different story, because you're not necessarily able to have those conversations in the background. So addressing them right away up front is the best way to go. And and stuff like that. And it's gonna be uncomfortable at times. And sometimes, addressing the child who's having the temper tantrum, that's embarrassing as well, because like, I feel for some of those parents sometimes, right? Like, they're in the store, and the child starts acting out, and they feel like all their eyes are on them, and they and I do feel for them because there is a fear there and stuff like that. But it is an opportunity for us to grow as a person and learn ways. So how can we mitigate that situation and set those spaces in place and deal with it there in a healthy way, so that um, so that we can mitigate those easier in the future.
So this actually segues into a great piece that I want to really talk about even deeper, because what we've talked mainly about is the social exposure, but the social exposure is actually an illusion. The social exposure really doesn't matter. You aren't being exposed to anything, because I guarantee you people care more about themselves than they care about you. They're worried about themselves screwing up more than they're worried about looking at how you screw up. What happens is that someone who feels a certain way about themselves looks for ways to alleviate that social exposure. And so they look for the most obvious person who's going to have something they can have people focus on more than themselves. And so then that's what creates the embarrassment. For instance, you're talking with someone, that person you're talking to is more concerned about their own image. They see something that you did they consider a screw up, and so then they decide to focus on that because they're so afraid of them being focused on it. They want to drive the focus somewhere else. So this is what social exposure really is. But social exposure is an illusion. It is a logical fallacy. And I say that because it has nothing to do with how you act socially. It has to do everything with how you identify with yourself. So social exposure is created by identity disruption. And the identity disruption is basically how you identify with yourself. The way, excuse me, the ways in which you see yourself, how you accommodate, how you are as a father with your parenting authority, how you might be the peacemaker in your family in order to avoid conflict, or how you've become accustomed to silence as a way of being able to weather out a storm of conflict that is already there. These are evidence of someone who does not really have a strong sense of identity, the values that they have, what they stand for, what they stand against, the motives that they have, and the morals in which that inform their values. And these things are really important to establish whenever you can. Earlier is better. As they said, the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago. The second time is today. The second best time is today. So learning the values is never okay, well, I missed it. That doesn't exist. What happens is you just look for the time when it's going to best be of benefit to you to understand where your boundaries lie. And this season, if you haven't guessed, has been all about really boundaries, how we set those boundaries and how we really move forward to not only establish but reinforce those boundaries, and doing that in ways that don't make us a target for social exposure. But the only way that we can actually have that strong identity is through practice. It isn't that, well, I have my boundaries today, so I'm good. No, you've got to practice at defending them. A boundary is only as good as how well it's defended. It's like in medieval times when you had a let's say the Trojan War. The Trojan War was successful only because of deception. For most of the war, 50,000 Greeks came to Troy to break down an impenetrable wall. They lost thousands upon thousands upon thousands of men because they threw themselves against a wall that would not budge. Think of that wall as a boundary that you have to have. And how you reinforce your boundaries. It has to be something that withstands pressure, because pressure is going to happen. People want what they want. And so they're going to try and pressure you to side with them. Someone who is unpracticed is going to do so, then feel embarrassment because they betray their own values, and they're going to feel the social exposure because now they're in uncharted territory. They don't know what to do, and so they feel the stress of the social encounter. So practicing those boundaries is really important. As you practice the boundaries, you gain a stronger sense of identity. Your stronger sense of identity gives you an understanding of how you show up in social environments, and that removes the threat of social exposure.
Yeah, that's a very good point. As you've shared, talking about boundaries and stuff like that. That's something that is probably one of the hardest concepts for people to truly understand in a healthy way, because boundaries are, yes, they are a fortified wall, as you shared, but at the same token, there's something that needs to they're there for protection. And in a properly healthy relationship, you would ideally wouldn't think you would need any boundaries, because people would understand and treat each other respectfully in all circumstances and stuff like that, and blah blah blah, and everything. But I mean, boundaries go beyond even just how people treat you, or how you treat others. It's what people expect of you as well. And that's something that we is important in all of this too, because as you talked about the social exposure, not living up to or meeting someone else's perceived expectations is sometimes an area that really is hard to understand where your boundaries can lie, so to speak, right? And so, you know, you talk about social exposure a lot, and how this plays into the boundaries and stuff. We had a great example of social exposure and all that stuff that's still happening to this day when we consider outside influences, whether it be in the political realm, or whether it be, the what people call the COVID pandemic, and all that other kind of stuff, right? We saw huge amounts of people who fell into this trap of fear and social exposure, not wanting to be on the wrong side of the fence in whatever argument and stuff like that. And it became actually, in some sense, and it still is in some sense, very verbally volatile for a lot of people, because people have developed some very strong opinions over what was considered to be right or wrong. And that's it. I think that's, in my sense, that's one of the very extreme uh, situations of what we're talking about. But it often happens in a much more subtle way. And that's I think where the real danger comes in when it comes to, say, our boundaries and stuff like that, is those subtle experiences that we have, that we tend to let our guard down against and stuff like that. And um, and we got to be very mindful of that, because it may start off as something very slight or whatever, and you can overlook it and everything. But as we've talked about in previous episodes, that one slight subtle push on your boundary that you let slide, that then the next time the person pushes a little harder, then they push a little harder, and and then it becomes, okay, well, where was the boundary actually, right? And so that's a question that I think we should all be asking ourselves, and um, and I'd like you to speak into that a little, Jason.
So, yeah, when it comes to really understanding how to develop your boundaries, there are a number of questions you can ask yourself in each situation to determine whether engaging or not engaging is really the best answer. So, the first one is, what value does this action serve? And that's if you plan on taking an action, such as you plan on engaging in some way. What is that going to serve? Who is that going to serve? And how is that going to impact the social engagement? The next one is, what responsibility belongs to me? What am I responsible for? And oftentimes in a social engagement, we tend to lose track of what we are responsible for. And we tend to get hijacked by people and by situations that we're not supposed to take responsibility for. We're not supposed to take on that which does not belong to us. But first, we have to understand what does belong to us. What am I responsible for right now? How am I responsible for showing up for myself and for others? And that's going to help you understand um, what is really important for you to communicate in any situation, really. The next question is, what will my silence communicate? If you decide to stay silent, what is that going to communicate to yourself? And not to others, but to yourself. How is that going to sit with you? Because silence is either going to communicate authority, it's going to communicate stress, or it's going to communicate weakness. But it all depends on how you use it and how you show up with it. And the next question is actually it's actually a two-part question. So the first part is, what pattern will continue if I avoid this moment? On the converse side, what will become established if I engage in this moment? And so now you're really looking at both sides of the coin. If I do nothing, what is going to happen? How is that going to set a precedent for me? And if I engage, what kind of precedent is that going to set? And so this is all long-term thinking stuff. These are things that you don't just think about short term. These all have long-term consequences. You want to look at the second and third order of effect, meaning that once you say something, or once you do something, or you say or do nothing, what is likely to occur after that, then after that? And by looking at things in a long-term idea, you can set that against the goal you want to have for yourself, how you want to show up for yourself, how you want to engage with others, and how you want to make sure that when you are engaging with others, you convey the type of person you want to convey, because that is going to inform others how they should be interacting with you. So this is more of these questions all are for your own benefit. They're for you to how you're going to show up rather than how others are going to see you, because other people don't matter. No one cares about you. The only person who really cares about you is you, because you live with yourself for the rest of your life. Everyone in your life, every single person in your life, your parents, your siblings, your spouse, your children, friends, co-workers, and everyone else around you is in your life for a very short period of time compared to how long you're in your own life. Your parents are going to transition eventually. They're going to pass on. Your your spouse is you're either going to get divorced, or one of you is going to pass on as well. Your kids are going to outlive you, and they're probably going to move away before that happens. And they're going to have their own lives. Co-workers, they move on. They move into different jobs. They get promoted. They do other things. They're no longer in your circle. Friends, same thing. You have friends for a period of time, and then interests change. The ways in which you relate to each other change. And so then you're no longer interacting anymore. Everyone in your life eventually um, leaves in some way. And that can be a scary thing for many people, but it's also a very liberating thing, because what that means is that the responsibility for you is to focus on the most consistent part of your life, which is you.
I really like that perspective that you brought up to light with, because we're truly with ourselves 24/7. Like even in our unconscious state of sleeping, we're still with ourselves in our dreams or uh, other aspects. I mean, I believe that in our unconscious state, our subconscious is still operating in the background in some way, just in a different level. But we're truly with ourselves 24/7. Nobody in our life, nobody, no other human being, as you shared, is with ourselves 24/7 like we are. And so that's where that's why one of the reasons why self care and stuff like that is so important, because it plays into how do we talk to ourselves, how do we treat ourselves, and even having boundaries for ourselves in that regards, because we can definitely be our own worst enemy. I know I have been for so many years, and and how we treat ourselves, how we think of ourselves, all that stuff plays into what we're talking about today when it comes to the underlying subconscious layer, when it comes to our interactions with people out in the world around us, and stuff like that. And so that's something else that I think that we should really, like I know we've talked about it, but it is another area of importance along with boundaries is that self-care and having boundaries for ourselves in that sense of self-care, because as you were sharing with about identity, as we're growing, as we're maturing, as we're learning to become more into an alignment and more authentic with ourselves, we have to it's part of that journey. Is letting go of those old behaviors, those old thoughts, and putting boundaries around those thoughts, right? Like when those intrusive thoughts come into your mind, it's like, well, wait a second. I may have played that role back then, but I'm moving in a new direction now. And I have the ability to now say, you know what, I don't need to think that way anymore. And so boundaries for ourselves are just as important as it is with other people.
It is, in the sense that it gives you the opportunity to share how you respond, how you show up with others, how you come across, and how other people interact with you. And the really great benefit of that becomes, how can I show up to another person or to a group of people in a way that will not only honor me but serve them, and serve them in a way that betters the interaction for everyone and honors the boundaries that I have set for myself. And that right there is the ultimate evidence of a true leader, someone who is just given respect. They don't even have to demand it. They're just given respect. And they're given respect because people understand this person is a person of value. Not only do they have a high sense of value for themselves, but they seek to see the highest value in others. And this is another thing that happens when you establish strong boundaries for yourself and you live those boundaries consistently. You begin to notice the people who refuse to live by good boundaries and how those people aren't necessarily the best to hang around with. And if you have been hanging around with them, maybe you need to make better life choices. And then the ones that you want to have, or the ones that you see have the potential for great boundaries, that they live by, are the kind of people you want to spend more time with, the kind of people you want to really interact on a deeper level with, understanding how they're going to add that they could possibly add value to the interaction as well. And just through the right interaction with them, they then see how they can better themselves and better the interaction with others as well. Leadership inspires leadership. And when you are able to have a strong boundary within yourself, display that strong boundary, interact with other people, and invite others to do the same through your interactions, that is how trust is formed. And trust is the building block of all relationships across all spectrums, whether it be business, social, or intimate. You cannot have a strong relationship without building the trust that lets a person believe that interacting with you can create a better sense of who they are and allow them to interact with the world better as well.
Yeah, I really like where you're going with this, because trust is definitely one of the big foundations, and by holding on to these boundaries and being consistent in them, that is, I think, the biggest part of that is being consistent in them. It does, not only does that to build the trust, but it also creates that sense of safety. And when it comes to our marriage relationship with our spouses, being consistent in our boundaries, developing that trust with her, creating that safety, leads to her feeling more secure. And that's something that a lot of women, when we talk about the difference between a male female dynamic, there's a lot of talk out there about how women need to feel secure. And secure isn't just financial security and stuff like that. It's emotional security. And that emotional security can largely be propagated by us and how we behave, and how we build that trust in our relationships by being consistent, by having those boundaries in place, because that plays out into all of our interactions, out beyond our interactions with our spouse as well. The more we can be consistent in our boundaries, the more she can trust us. The more she can trust us, the more she feels secure in the relationship. And then that way, when there's outside influences coming in trying to break that, the more you can stay consistent in your boundaries with that, the more she can trust you, the more she feels secure in the relationship, the stronger your relationship will ultimately be.
And this raises a really good point because oftentimes when men don't lead properly, women feel the need to pick up the slack. And then they don't know when to ease up unless they are confronted by someone who can consistently take over that role, especially when the the shit test happens, when a woman in your life decides that she is going to challenge your authority, challenge your leadership. And authority, I use very, very carefully because we don't have authority over anyone other than ourselves. And so when I say authority, what I mean is how well are you coming across yourself? How well are you displaying yourself? How consistent are you in that display? Are you someone who shows the responsibility necessary for her to be comfortable in giving up that role, believing that you're going to be consistent enough where she can depend on you to fill that role without her needing to step in? And there's a lot of anxiety in that because there's a lot of unknown. And especially when a woman doesn't receive that kind of signal from a lot of the men in her life. Maybe she didn't have a good father role model in her life. Maybe the men that she had been with, they were not the kind of men that she could depend on to fill that role. And so she found herself having to step into that role. Maybe there are a bunch of other factors. Maybe the people that she hangs around with really tear her down or make her believe that she has to fill in a role that is uncomfortable for her. But it gives her a sense no, it gives her the illusion of control that she can control her environment. Spoiler alert, no one can control their environment. And so someone like that, and we see them everywhere. There's so many more women that fit this example. In the past 15 years, it boggles the mind how much this has sprung up. But when we meet a woman like that, it is so much harder to then show up consistently in a way where she feels comfortable with giving up that role because there is comfort in the illusion of control. There really is no control, but there's comfort in the illusion. And so having to give up that illusion means that now she has to discover who she is. And spoiler alert, by taking on a role that was not meant for her to sustain, she has not had the opportunity to really figure out who she is. So now there's a lot more problems that come with that. So we need to. This is why it's so important for men to take on to be able to have these firm boundaries, to set them, to display them, and then use them as a way of being able to invite others to become the best version of themselves. It's hard, especially when you are in a culture or when you're in a society that has conditioned you to believe something else, that this isn't the case. But look at the amount of anxiety, depression, mental illness that exists because the roles that men were meant to play have been abandoned. We see an inordinate amount, a ridiculous level of mental health issues simply because the ideas of boundaries, of proper social engagement, and of being of service to each other have stopped being the rule. They're starting to become an exception. And we wonder where everything went wrong. It went wrong when we decided that we weren't going to be of service to each other.
Yeah, the mental illness aspect of life is huge right now, and that's something that is a very serious topic that I think. I mean, I don't know if we can go into the depths of what needs to be talked about when it comes to that in this particular conversation, and it's not really what this one's really about, but it is definitely an outlier, a result of us abandoning ourselves, losing sight of who we are as men, but even as women, is that happens as well. And I like the idea of what you shared as well with the illusion of control. We think that certain things in our lives, like our status, our job, our career, the amount of money we make, all this kinds of stuff, it makes us who we are, and we want to formulate these things as part of our identity. But when those things disappear, because well, company folds, right? The company that you're working for, that was a well-paying job, all of a sudden doesn't exist anymore, and now you find yourself unemployed and you're not making that kind of money anymore, and you still got bills to pay, right? Those are things that are beyond your control, that can have a huge fundamental shift in your identity. But again, getting back to the sense of boundaries, and where we're going with this, in the sense of the embarrassment and social constructs, and this all this other kind of stuff. When we get rooted into our true authentic selves, it doesn't matter what happens on the outside of the world around us. When we be so centered and grounded in ourselves and our true identity, and putting forward, as both Jason and I both agree on and share on, is taking our authentic selves and leaning into ways of how we can lead and serve others, to not only better ourselves, but better the environment around us, and better the people around us, and improve the quality of life of those around us. That that goes a long ways. And when it comes to dealing with these issues, that of how people respond to us and stuff like that, the more we are grounded in our authentic selves, there's still going to be attacks. There's still going to be those things that we can't control, but they will be a lot easier to manage and a lot easier to deal with when you're coming from that space of strength, when you're coming from that space of true authenticity, and you're coming from that space of where what you're putting forward is actually the true purpose behind it, is to serve others and not just protect yourself.
Absolutely. And the more that you focus on being of service, it's not that you're protecting yourself less. You are protecting yourself proactively. what you are doing is you are creating an environment where the conditions for safety exist. And safety and protection are not the same thing. This is really talked about by a researcher. His name is Dr. Stephen Porges. He created a model called the polyvagal theory. And this is really a model of human engagement. Basically, if you are in a state of protection, this doesn't mean that you can rely on that. You are protected for a moment in time, but the continued protection is not guaranteed. Guaranteed protection over time, that is considered safety, especially when you can reliably depend on that protection long term. And the protection isn't just from one person; it's from a group. This is why we are we are creatures. We are pack animals. Humans are pack animals. We rely on the group to let us know how safe we are. And the more safe we feel, the more likely we are to take manageable risks that are going to help us understand what else we are capable of. And the more we do that, the more we grow. But if we are just in a sense of protection, we are still in survival mode. And there is no growth in survival mode. And so when you are of service to each other, you create that inherent canopy of safety. You create that inherent map that safety can exist. And that's really important to help us understand how we are going to continue interacting with each other. Do we interact with each other hesitantly, or do we interact with each other in increasing levels of trust, believing that as I serve you, you serve me? And so we both grow together and we begin to thrive. And now we can find other ways that we can be of service to each other and more people. It becomes the most important thing. And it all starts with your own personal discovery. And really, it starts with behavior. So there are four definitive ways that you can begin to develop your boundaries in a way that is going to help you and also help your environment, or help the interactions that you have. That's what I mean by by environment. And really, this is called the bold response. And this is based on the framework that Jason and I have kind of built everything around. Um, and it all starts with behavior, the ability to understand what happened, the ability to really look at your own behavior and say, what did I do? What did I experience? What did I understand? And how did I react or respond?
Yeah, once you understand the first part of in the behavior part of it, it moves on to the next part, which is taking ownership. You know, because you got to to be able to take ownership, true ownership of where you're at. You got to first understand what happened and all that sort of stuff. And so ownership is like, okay, as we talked about earlier, what is my responsibility in this? What decision belongs to me? And how much discomfort am I willing to tolerate, or must I tolerate? and it's, and also, what was my reaction? And was does my or does you know and what belongs to the other person? And so ownership is I think another key element to everything that you and I talk about as well.
Ownership goes along with behavior, absolutely. Because with behavior, what you're doing is you are just identifying what happened. But with ownership, you're really looking at, okay, so what part did I play in this? What was I responsible for creating? So if we look at the idea of a father with an unruly child, what is my responsibility in the development of this child? And at first, you have to see that you have a responsibility, an inherent responsibility to ensuring the proper and coherent development of the child that you brought into this world, that you helped bring into this world. Understanding how your actions, your reactions, your responses, they all get marked on the children that you raise because they notice everything and they take in everything, especially for the first 6 years of life. They're just taking things in. And so then they begin to test their behavior. And it's your job to, as you see those tests, whether it be the father or the mother, it doesn't matter. It is your job to redirect those children, your child or children, however many you decide to have, it doesn't matter, um, in a way that lets them know what is socially acceptable and what needs to be corrected. And that's really important because in behavior, whatever does not get corrected becomes rewarded. So you're either rewarding or correcting. And if you're not correcting, you are automatically rewarding. And once you understand what the ownership is, what you're supposed to own, what you're responsible for, what you want to define is what is it that requires you to protect. And this has to do again with the boundaries. What is something that you have to reinforce? What is something that you will not give up? What limit of change are you going to allow the things that are most important to you? So, for instance, if there is a disagreement on how to um, raise your children, the reward and the correction, what does that look like? What is it that you're going to say? This is the limit that we have. If we're going to disagree, we're going to disagree in private. We are not going to do it in public. We'll not make it a spectacle. Or if you are having a joke, where is the limit as far as joking versus humiliating? And at what point will you refuse to take part in that? If there's a conflict between you and your spouse, what is the amount of exposure you're going to allow your children to have to that argument, that disagreement, or that conflict? And these are all really strong questions to ask as far as developing your limits. What limits will you not pass, and what are you going to defend as something that is your boundary, something that you will not allow to be passed over? Think of the limit as the point of that you won't go past, the line in the sand, so to speak. The line in the sand is your limit, and that's as far as you will go.
And these questions and stuff that we're talking about are actually great things and conversations to have at any point in time in the relationship, especially when we talk about being proactive. But especially for those of you men who are maybe entering into a newer relationship and stuff like that, these are great questions to talk and discuss proactively in the marriage relationship, as we shared earlier in this podcast. And the reason for that is because it takes away the uncertainty when these certain situations arise, because you can then address things pretty much head on, right then and there. And then if it says, you can just say, hey, you know what, we've had this discussion before, and this is what we said, right? We can refer back to it, and so it helps establish where things are in the relationship, and so yeah, again, this is something that could happen at any time, at any point of any relationship, but definitely very beneficial in those relationships that are happening early on.
And you actually made a really great segue into the last part of bold. We covered behavior, ownership, limit, and then direction. So whenever you have a limit, if the limit is just stated but there's nowhere else to go, the limit's going to be broken. Think of it as inertia. Everything must move. So if it's not going to move in one direction, it has to move in a different direction. And you want to be the one that establishes the direction that it moves. So We can handle discipline, but what we're going to do is we're going to discuss it in private. After we've seen what's happening, we're going to find a time that is best appropriate for us to discuss how we move forward. The way we reacted, okay, we reacted that way once, whatever. But now we have to create a plan. We know that this is a new thing that we've had to adjust to. Now we can plan around. And what's really important is to not expect the fact that you have to anticipate everything. What this is all data that you look at after the fact. These are all what's known as trailing data, meaning that the thing has already happened. And what you're doing is looking at what occurred, what was left, the behavior that was exhibited, the ownership that was had, the limits that were engaged, and the direction that was suggested moving forward. And this helps you plan for what happens next, not anticipate. You can't anticipate life. It's impossible. Just look at the stock market. People try to anticipate things that happen on the stock market all the time, and they lose their shirts. You can't predict. All that you can do is create the best system you can to decide what you're going to do and how to plan for the next event that happens, for the next experience that you have, for the next set of circumstances that you are met by. That's all that you can do. Beyond that, you have absolutely no control. So the best bet is to create your sense of structure now. And then as you are exposed to experiences, the ones that you have planned for, you deal with the way that you know how to. Great. The ones that you don't anticipate, you experience them the best that you can, and then you look at them and make a plan moving forward. And the plan moving forward should be aligned with things that you've already set up. Because that is how you create consistency in your day-to-day, how other people see you as being a solid individual, and how your acts of service become dependable. And people take you up on your invitation to also become people who are consistent, dependable, and service-oriented.
And the beautiful thing about this is by doing this now and being proactive with this kind of stuff, when these unanticipated circumstances come up or these ones that you haven't planned for come up, by doing this now and being consistent in it, it establishes an easier bridge to having the conversations needed for those unintended circumstances, and it makes it easier to have those discussions later on. And it honestly, the more you practice this, the more you develop this in your relationship. In it really is a way of creating stronger intimacy through the building of the trust, which is built through consistency, which creates that sense of safety and security. And the more you practice this, the more you put this into implementation, the stronger the relationship can grow, and the easier. It's not necessarily going to always be easy, but it'll go a long ways towards weathering storms that may come up in the future.
So with every plan, there is this quote that I love from Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And you're going to get punched in the face, proverbially. Not necessarily literally, but your plan is going to be tested. And it's going to be tested with pushback. And people push back because they want what they want. And when they see resistance, they see that as an opportunity to fight that resistance to get their way. And so they're going to say things, they're going to do things, they're going to try things that undermine your boundaries because people want what they want because they only care about themselves. People are self-oriented. And this isn't to say that self-orientation is bad. A healthy sense of self-orientation is necessary. Some people do take it a little bit too far and become more self-oriented than they should be. But that self-orientation is just a healthy sense of self-identity, the desire to get one's own way in order to feel like they can move through their world safely. That's really all that it is. So when you hear certain things, you can plan for them. You can understand that, well, someone is just wanting their way because that's how they define their safety in the world. So if someone says you're being too sensitive when you establish a boundary, this is something that can really rub people the wrong way, especially if they haven't planned for it. Oh, you're being too sensitive. It can either come across as being um, really careless for your emotions. It is to a degree. I won't doubt that. But what it really is, like, again, someone trying to push your boundaries and use guilt as a way of getting you to soften those boundaries. So if you don't want to give in, you can say something like, I'm just being clear on how I will participate or how I will interact. And that's all you have to say is you're setting you're just you're being very clear. You're not being sensitive, you're being clear. And oftentimes, whenever I've used that, when someone says, "Oh, you're just being too sensitive," no, I'm being very clear in what I will tolerate. Oftentimes, one of two things happens: they either stop interacting with me, or they interact with me differently. And if they stop interacting with me, it's because they only want their way. They don't care about what I want. They're just going to find someone else who will give them what they want. Fine. And it's not going to be for me. Enjoy your life. And the people that do respect my boundaries will interact with me differently. It happens almost instantaneously. When I say that, they begin to recalibrate how they interact with me because I have set a boundary and now I've reinforced it after they've given me an objection to that boundary.
Yeah, and that's a very distinctive point that you make there too, in regards to being firm in a healthy way when it comes to maintaining a boundary with people. Because, as you said, people are going to push, and if they are genuine, as you said, they'll recognize, okay, all right, I will respect the boundary, and we'll continue to interact. If they're not genuine and they're selfish, as you say for yourself, or they care only about what they want, or they have an alternative agenda, then they are either going to push harder, or they're going to, like you said, back off and stop the interaction altogether. And that's unfortunate. But I mean, that again is not on you. The part on you is to maintain the healthy boundary. And and again, even if it is people outside of your, say, your marriage covenant marriage relationship, or your intimate relationship with your spouse, it is another way of creating safety within other relationships as well. It could be with your boss, it could be with a friend, it could be with another family member, and stuff like that. Like, because it also gives the what it does is it also gives the other person the opportunity to reflect on themselves and their behavior. And if they're truly a person who is seeking to grow themselves as a person, then they'll see it as an opportunity for them to reflect on what happened as well for themselves, and give them that opportunity to change the behavior, as you suggested, Jason. And that's ultimately what we want is we want to be able to create these healthy, safe environments where everybody is being respectful to each other, and creating safe environments for all people to thrive in. Like a lot of what we see in the world today when it comes to the chaos and the dysfunction of marriages, or and stuff like that, is because people are constantly pushing boundaries for selfish gain, and instead of seeing that there is a better way that we can interact with each other in society. And sometimes a lot of that is also, an extension of pain that they have suffered in some way or whatever, right? So they become too wrapped up in themselves that they can't see anything beyond their pain and their wants and their needs in the moment. And and it doesn't mean that we ease up on our boundaries because of a person's in that situation. It's an opportunity for us to extend grace to that person because we can understand where they're coming from. But it doesn't mean that we ease up on our boundaries because this person is dealing with stuff that they're dealing with on their inside on their own, right?
And what's really important to understand is that people are going to take this a certain kind of way because one, you've acted in a certain kind of way before, that's different now. And they're going to feel like being challenged means that their worth is being challenged, which is not the case, which is why, Jason, like you said, a certain amount of grace is absolutely necessary. And if this is not something that is common or that is um something that you've done before, something that is really learned or known, it's gonna have some there could be some bumps in the road. You're going to make some common mistakes where you might wait until you get angry before you decide to take action. You might decide that you want to be right when you are having a correction with a spouse. You might um, demand respect in a way that becomes humiliating to people. And these are just examples of how people get it wrong. When they are learning. I have done many of these before when I learned to really assert myself. I made a lot of these mistakes. I oftentimes would threaten consequences and try to do it in a way that was persuasive, but was still intimidating. In order to get my way. That's manipulation. And it does not serve anyone. It might serve in the short term, but long term, it destroys credibility, it destroys trust. And so there's a learning curve when it comes to this. The important thing is understand or to really begin to monitor how you behaved, what ownership was yours, the limits that you wanted to put down, and the direction you wanted to go, and then evaluate whether you made that. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some journal entries. It's going to take some writing things down, really understanding and seeing what you had done, creating some sort of map. When you're working out, you're creating a workout plan. This is an interaction plan. It requires the exact same kind of discipline as a workout plan. And so it takes a person the ability to really sit down, take pause, and do the hard thing. Make the changes necessary. Take the risk of being wrong because you're going to. Even when you are seasoned, you're going to get it wrong every now and then. Getting it wrong is a part of life. You're guaranteed to screw it up at least 5, 6, 700 times. I'm probably on take 1,022 right now. So that's fine. But I mean, getting it wrong is how you learn. You don't grow unless you fuck it up. So you have to mess it up. You have to mess up in order for you to improve. You fail forward. And that's the important thing. Failing doesn't mean you stop trying. Failing means that you learn. And so you find out where your limits were soft and where they collapse. You figure out the direction that you didn't have and what you want, and really make it more refined. Make it something that you can really tell people. Make it a unique selling proposal, a USP, something that you can actually tell people of where you plan on going. This is great for friends. This is especially great for people that you are dating before you get married. This is necessary when you are married, being able to understand the both of you understanding where you are going, and also helping others around you to determine whether they belong in your circle or not. This is all really important stuff. And so get it wrong. Be willing to get it wrong. Play with it. It's the only way you're going to learn.
Yeah, that's man, I couldn't say it better, really. I mean, you think about anything you do in life, where you're learning a new skill, right? Like playing a musical instrument or learning to play a new sport or whatever. You're gonna make mistakes, and this is no different than anything else in life. You know, learning to communicate in this way, learning to communicate healthy boundaries, learning to stand up for those boundaries, learning to articulate what it actually is, and having the willingness to confront pushback when it comes. It's all things that are skills that are learned, and it's done through those uncomfortable moments. And as Jason said, you're not going to get it right right off the hop. You know, like and it's a lifelong learning, because every time you come across somebody new who doesn't know you, there's a potential for a new sense of pressure against you in regards to this. And so you're in a position to where you're having to revisit everything that you've learned before. And and it may have to be expressed in a different way that you hadn't expressed it before, because you're now dealing with a new person. And so it's that's the way life is. I think, being put on this earth, as we have been, this is probably this is like the school of hard knocks. You really think about it, right? Like everything we go through in life, it's through challenge. Everything we learn through life isn't through challenge in some way. Even our positive moments in life, probably, if we really look at it, we can look at it that there was some kind of challenge that got us to that point of positivity, right? And so, I mean, like yeah, I mean, I can go on a whole rabbit trail on that, and I won't. But but I mean, like, I really, you know, think that this has been a great conversation between you and I, Jason. And there's some things that we can really understand intellectually, and still struggle to live out when the pressure's on. And boundaries are one of them. It's easy for Jason and I to sit here and say, yeah, I should have spoken up in that moment, or I should have done this, or I should have done that. But it's much harder when you're standing in the room and your heart is pounding and everybody's watching and you're trying to figure it out, what the right response actually is. And that's one of the reasons why Jason and I believe so deeply in a brotherhood, and why we are working together to bring Lifting the Soul Ministries to life, why we're putting on the Forge podcast and building the Forge Brotherhood community, bringing brothers together to help each other, serve each other. Because it's through this brotherhood that we can lift each other up, that we can share our experiences and really develop the leader that's within all of us.
I think if I were going to sum this up, this podcast up into four sentences, it would be that embarrassment is a great indicator to let you know where you are not enforcing the boundaries that you need to enforce. And as soon as you learn as soon as you learn that lesson, you can begin to identify the things you want other people to really know about you and how you want to interact through your world. And by doing that, you build the confidence to interact with others in a way that they're going to appreciate, they're going to enjoy, and they're also going to grow from.
So don't be afraid to have those conversations. It may be uncomfortable, but it's through that discomfort where growth happens. And when it comes to building your relationship, especially with your significant partner, or your person that you're going to start dating, or get into a more serious relationship with, by having these conversations early, addressing these things proactively, learning from each other, being curious about each other in this process will go a long ways to building a strong foundation for that relationship. And as always, we're very thankful for all of you who choose to tune in to our podcast here. And, we honestly are here to serve you guys. And this podcast can only move forward with your guys' help. And so do us a great one by hitting that subscribe button, sharing this with others, and interacting with us. Give us a comment. Tell us what spoke out to you most about this particular conversation today. And as always, you can head to our website, liftingthesoulministries.com, and check out what we have for you there.
If you like what we have to say, leave a comment. If you don't like what we have to say, leave a comment. Let us know. We're more than happy to interact with you and find out what you did or didn't like about it, and find out more about how we can help if that is appropriate.
Awesome. As always, Jason, it's great being with you, hanging out and having this chat. Until next time, bye for now.